I took the night watchman job at Red Barn Antiques because I needed the silence. After a decade of factory noise, the idea of sitting alone from midnight till 6, just making rounds in a building full of old quiet things, sounded like a dream. The pay was decent, the rules were simple. Patrol every hour, check the locks, log anything unusual. Mr. Henderson, the owner, was a kind, nervous man. On my first night, he handed me the keys and a heavy mag light. "The items here, they have history," he'd said, avoiding my eyes. "Just respect the space and you'll be fine." For the first 2 weeks, it was perfect. Just the hum of the climate control and the scent of old wood and lemon polish. I'd do my rounds, my flashlight beam gliding over dusty portraits, shelves of tarnished silver, and racks of vintage clothes that seemed to hold their breath as I passed. The first thing I brushed off was the music. A faint, tinny sound, like an old music box coming from the far corner of the main hall. I found the source, a small porcelain ballerina on a jewelry box. Her tiny painted eyes stared blankly. I closed the lid. The music stopped. I logged it as a faulty mechanism. A few nights later, it was the dolls. I always hated that section. Dozens of glassy-eyed children staring from the shelves. During my 2 a.m. round, I found one on the floor sitting upright against a cabinet leg. I thought maybe I'd bump the shelf. I placed it back. The next night, 2 were on the floor, positioned to face each other. My skin prickled. I put them away, telling myself it was settling, or vibrations from a distant train. Then came the whispering. It was so soft I thought it was the air vents at first. Just a sibilant hiss between the aisles. I'd stop, and it would stop. I'd walk, and it would start again, always just ahead, around the next corner. It never formed words, but it felt intentional, like it was leading me. That's when the silence stopped feeling peaceful and started feeling like it was waiting for something. I started bringing a thermos of coffee so strong it could wake the dead, a poor choice of words given the circumstances. My rounds became quicker, my pauses shorter. I'd shine my light into dark corners before I entered them. The whispering was a constant companion now, a soft static at the edge of my hearing. One night, near the grandfather clocks, I saw him. A tall, dark shape standing at the end of the aisle, perfectly still. My light hit him, and for a split second, I saw the outline of an old-fashioned suit before he stepped back into the deeper shadows between 2 wardrobes. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking. "This is private property." Silence. I radioed the on-call security line, my hand shaking. "Base, I have a visual on an intruder in the clock section." Static was my only reply. I moved forward, maglite held like a club. The space between the wardrobes was empty, but on the floor lay a single tarnished pocket watch, its chain coiled neatly. It hadn't been there 10 minutes ago. I didn't touch it. I backed away and finished my round from a distance, my nerves screaming. The rest of the night was quiet, too quiet. Even the whispering had stopped. When Mr. Henderson arrived at 6 a.m., I told him about the intruder. His face went pale. "Did he speak to you?" he asked, which I thought was a strange question. "No, he just vanished." Mr. Henderson nodded slowly, looking relieved. "Probably just a homeless person. I'll have the locks checked." But he kept glancing toward the doll section. He knew something he wasn't telling me. I should have quit right then. But rent was due, and a stubborn part of me refused to be spooked by shadows and old dolls. It was a mistake. The following week was the worst. The atmosphere in the barn shifted. It felt heavy, charged. The whispering was replaced by soft, distinct footsteps that echoed mine. I'd stop, they'd stop. I'd take 2 steps, I'd hear 2 steps behind me. It was a game, and I was losing. During my 3 a.m. round, I decided to check the security camera feeds on the office monitor. The screens were divided into 12 sections. Everything looked normal until I saw movement in Hall B, the doll aisle. A figure was there, his back to the camera, tall and wearing that same old-fashioned suit. He was reaching for a shelf. My blood ran cold. I was supposed to be the only one in the building. I grabbed my radio and ran toward Hall B, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly. I burst into the aisle expecting a confrontation. It was empty. The dolls stared, their smiles seeming to mock me. I radioed the office again, my voice a desperate whisper. "He's in Hall B. I saw him on camera." I ran back to the office, my lungs burning. I stared at the monitor. Hall B was empty. I rewound the feed. The timestamp for 3:07 a.m. showed the aisle perfectly still. No figure, no movement. I played it again. Nothing. But I had seen him. I knew I had. I sat there, paralyzed, until the rising sun cast weak light through the dusty windows. I was no longer just a watchman. I was prey in a gilded cage. My last night was last night. I had decided it wasn't worth it. No job was worth this creeping dread. I just had to make it through one final shift. I did my rounds mechanically, not looking at the shadows, ignoring the sounds. I just had to log out and leave. At 5 a.m., with an hour to go, I was in the office, packing my things. The main light was on, a small island of safety. I felt a sudden, icy coldness at my back. I turned slowly. He was standing right outside the office door, looking in through the glass pane. This time I saw him clearly. His face was gaunt, his eyes were dark hollows, and his clothes were from a century ago. He wasn't solid, but I could see the pattern of his waistcoat, the dust on his shoulders. He lifted a pale, translucent hand and pointed, not at me, but past me, at the key cabinet. Then he was gone. Trembling, I walked to the key cabinet. Hanging from a hook was a small, tarnished key I'd never seen before, with a tag that had faded writing on it. I don't know what came over me, but I took it. I left the building at 5:59 a.m., left the keys in the Dropbox, and texted Mr. Henderson that I quit. This morning, I Googled Red Barn Antiques. On their website, in a section about the building's history, was a photo from the 1920s. It showed the original owner, a tall, gaunt man named Silas Green, standing proudly in his store. He was wearing the exact same suit. The caption said he was found dead in his shop in 1927, clutching a small, locked music box. The key was never found. The key I pocketed is sitting on my kitchen table. I can hear a faint, tinny melody coming from it, and part of me, the part that's still a night watchman, knows that some doors, once locked, should never, ever be opened. Story 2. I landed the overnight tech gig at radio station WVXN purely out of desperation. The graveyard shift paid my student loans, and the work was simple. Make sure the automated playlist kept running, record the hourly station ID, and reboot the system if it glitched. The station was a relic, tucked away in a concrete building on the outskirts of a sleeping town. From 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., I was the only soul in the place. My only company was the hum of servers and the ghost of static between songs. The first weird thing was the phone, the request line. It was supposed to be disconnected after midnight, a digital message telling listeners to go to the website. But one night around 2 a.m., the old red phone on the wall lit up and rang. A sharp, jangling sound that made me jump. I let it go to the message. It rang again and again. On the fourth ring, I picked it up. WVXN, request line is closed, silence. Then a faint, watery sound like someone blowing bubbles into the receiver. A voice, distant and distorted, whispered a single word, alone? The line went dead. I chalked it up to a prank call. Some kid with a voice modulator. But it happened again the next night, and the night after. Always the same question, whispered with that same wet, gurgling tone. Alone? I started unplugging the phone. That's when the audio glitches started. A song would be playing perfectly, and for just a split second, layered underneath the guitar solo or the singer's voice, I'd hear that same wet, bubbling whisper. It was never long enough to make out words, but it was there. I'd checked the digital logs, no errors, no corrupted files. It was as if the sound was being injected live into the broadcast. I was the tech. If there was a glitch, I was supposed to be able to find it. But I couldn't. That was the first time I felt real fear. The system was betraying me. The whispers in the audio became more frequent. I started hearing them during the pre-recorded ads, during the news segments. It was like a parasite in the signal. One night, during a quiet acoustic song, the whisper broke through clear as day. I see you. My blood went cold. I was sitting in the soundproof control room. The blinds were shut. No one could see me. I spun in my chair, my heart pounding. The room was empty. Just the glowing consoles and the large, dark window that looked into the empty recording booth. I stared at that window, at my own reflection staring back, pale and wide-eyed. That's when I saw it. A flicker of movement in the booth behind my reflection. I fumbled for the light switch. The fluorescent bars flickered on, illuminating the small, soundproofed room. It was empty. A single microphone stood in the center. I was letting the silence and the isolation get to me. I had to get a grip. I decided to run a full diagnostic. As the system scrolled through lines of code, I noticed something odd in the broadcast history log. Every night at exactly 3:33 a.m., the system registered a 5-second open mic transmission from the main booth, the booth that was always empty. The log entry was always the same. Source Studio A, duration 5s, input level 0 dB, 0 decibels, silence. But that couldn't be right. The system wouldn't log a transmission from a dead mic. I checked the physical switch for the booth mic. It was turned off. It had always been off. So what or who was keying the mic every night at 3:33? The next night, I was determined to solve the mystery. At 3:25 a.m., I sat in the control room, my eyes glued to the soundboard. The VU meter for the Studio A mic was flat. The switch was off. The booth was dark and empty. 3:30, 3:31. My palms were sweating. 3:32. The second hand on the wall clock ticked loudly. At 3:33 exactly, the VU meter for the Studio A mic jumped to life. The needle spiked into the red, holding there for 5 full seconds, registering a sound so loud it should have been deafening. But I heard nothing through the monitors. Absolute silence. The needle danced to a scream I couldn't hear. Then it dropped back to 0. I sat there, frozen. The rational part of my brain short-circuited. This wasn't a glitch. This was an intelligent, timed phenomenon. I played back the last 5 seconds of the master broadcast recording. On the visual waveform, it was a solid, thick bar, a pure, sustained blast of sound. But when I hit play, all I heard was a soft, wet, bubbling whisper. This time, I could understand the words. Almost time. A cold dread filled my stomach. I grabbed my things. I was leaving. I didn't care about the job anymore. As I stood up, the studio monitors, which should have been playing the next song in the playlist, crackled and went silent. Then a new sound filled the control room. It was the sound of the red request line phone ringing, but I had unplugged it. The cord was dangling from the wall. The ringing was coming through the broadcast speakers. It was on the air. I ran. I didn't bother shutting anything down. I burst out of the control room into the dim hallway, heading for the main exit. As I passed the window to the recording booth, I glanced inside. The booth light was on. A figure was standing at the microphone, its back to me. It was tall and gaunt, wearing what looked like a soaking wet suit. Water dripped from its sleeves, forming a small puddle on the floor. It slowly turned its head. Its skin was pale and bloated. Its eyes were milky white. Water streamed from its open mouth. It was the source of the whispers. It saw me. It began to turn its body, one hand rising, pointing a dripping finger directly at me through the glass. I didn't wait. I slammed my shoulder into the emergency exit, setting off the alarm, and stumbled out into the cold, blessedly normal night air. I never went back. I called in sick the next day and then quit over the phone. A few weeks later, out of morbid curiosity, I tuned into WVXN online. A new voice was doing the overnight show. I listened for an hour. No whispers, no glitches. I was about to turn it off, convinced it was all in my head, when the DJ came on after a song. His voice was cheerful. That was a great one. And hey, we've got a special treat coming up for you night owls. A lost recording from the station's archives, found in a flooded basement. We'll play it for you next. I turned off the stream. I didn't need to hear it. I already knew what it would sound like. I still hear it sometimes in the hum of my refrigerator or the static of a dead channel. That wet, bubbling whisper, asking a question I'm too afraid to answer. Story 3. They called us the Tunnel Tracers. Me, Leo, and Maya. Our town, Ravens Point, was built over a labyrinth of old storm drains and maintenance tunnels. For us, it was the ultimate adventure, a secret world beneath the sidewalks. We'd map uncharted branches, tag the walls, and laugh at the kids who were scared of the dark. We thought we knew every inch. We were wrong. It started with the sounds, not the usual drip of water or scuttle of rats. This was different, a dry, scraping sound, like bone on concrete. We'd shine our lights down a passage and the sound would stop. We blamed echoes, the wind, but there is no wind underground. Then we found the first marking. It wasn't one of our tags, it was a symbol, scraped into the concrete wall with something sharp. It looked like a stick figure with too many joints, its head tilted at an impossible angle. It felt old and wrong. Leo, always the joker, laughed it off. Probably some satanic panic junk from the 80s, he said, but he didn't touch it. None of us did. A week later, we found a new tunnel. It wasn't on any city blueprint. The entrance was hidden behind a collapsed section, a narrow crack just big enough to squeeze through. The air that poured out was stale and cold, carrying a smell like wet earth and old copper. Maya, our voice of reason, said we should turn back. But Leo was already halfway in. "This is it," he whispered, his voice full of awe. "The mother lode." My curiosity overpowered my fear. That was our first mistake. Our second was going in. The tunnel beyond the crack was different, older. The walls were rough-hewn stone, not smooth concrete. The ceiling was low, forcing us to hunch over. Our flashlight beam seemed weaker in here, swallowed by a deeper darkness. That's when we saw the nests, not bird nests. They were messy piles of sticks, bones, some small like rodents, others too large to identify, and shredded cloth. They were wedged into crevices in the walls about 5 feet off the ground. The scraping sound returned, louder now, closer. It seemed to come from all around us, bouncing off the narrow walls until it was inside my head. My heart was a drum solo in my chest. "We need to go. Now," Maya said, her voice tight with panic. Leo didn't argue this time. We turned to leave, but the path behind us didn't look right. The tunnel seemed longer, the way we came now, branching into 2 identical passages. Our own footprints in the damp silt were the only sign we'd been there, but they seemed to lead in a circle. We were disoriented. The air grew colder, and then we heard it. Not a scrape, a click, a rapid chittering click like a monstrous insect. It came from the darkness ahead of us, and this time it was answering another click from behind. We were not just lost, we were hunted. We ran. We didn't care about direction, we just needed to get away from the clicking. Our lights bounced wildly, creating a strobe effect of terrifying glimpses. A long, pale limb, thin as a skeleton's, darting back into a side passage. A flash of something hanging from the ceiling, scuttling away like a spider. The chittering was everywhere, hurting us. We weren't explorers anymore, we were prey in a burrow. We burst into a wider chamber, a junction where several tunnels met. In the center was a grimy, stagnant pool of water. And that's where we saw them. There were 3 of them. They were emaciated, their skin a sickly white, stretched tight over bizarre, elongated frames. Their limbs were too long and multi-jointed, allowing them to cling to the walls and ceiling like flies. They had no eyes, just deep, dark sockets. Their heads swiveled towards us in unison, their mouths opening to reveal rows of needle-like teeth. The clicking was coming from them. They moved in a jerky, unnatural way, closing in. Leo screamed and swung his backpack, hitting one of them. It didn't cry out, it just clicked faster, angrily. Maya pulled a flare from her pack, her emergency-only gear. She struck it. A sudden, blinding red light filled the cavern, and the creatures recoiled, hissing. They hated the light. "The crack! Find the crack!" she yelled. We scanned the walls, our eyes desperate. Then I saw it, the narrow opening we'd squeezed through. It was 20 feet away, past the creatures. It might as well have been a mile. Maya threw the flare. It landed between us and the things, creating a wall of sizzling red light. They shrieked, a sound that was pure static and pain. "Go!" she screamed. We ran, scrambling, not looking back. I squeezed through the crack first, feeling the rough stone tear my jacket. Leo was right behind me. We turned to pull Maya through. She was halfway when one of those long, pale arms shot out of the dark and wrapped around her ankle. She screamed, her fingers clawing at the stone. Leo and I grabbed her arms and pulled with every ounce of strength we had. There was a sickening pop and she came free, tumbling into us. We didn't stop. We ran through the familiar concrete tunnels, not stopping until we saw the faint glow of the street grate above. We never went back. The police found our story hysterical. A drug-fueled hallucination. they said. But Maya's ankle was bruised black, and imprinted on the skin were 5 long, thin finger marks. We don't talk about it. We don't trace tunnels anymore. But sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I hear a sound. A faint, dry scrape against my bedroom window. And I know they're not just in the tunnels anymore. They're learning the world above. And they remember who found them. Story 4. I moved into the Oak Ridge apartments because it was cheap and quiet. A fresh start after a bad breakup. My new home was a studio on the 4th floor, apartment 4A. The building was old with thick walls and creaky floors, but the silence was a blessing. For the first week, it was perfect. Then I met my neighbor in 4B. I never actually met him. I just became aware of his presence. Mr. Albright, that's what the super called him. An old man who kept to himself. The first thing I noticed was the silence from his apartment. Not just quiet, but a total, absolute void of sound. No TV, no footsteps, no running water. It was like the unit was empty, but I knew it wasn't. I'd see his door cracked open just an inch when I left for work, and feel this pressure, like the air itself was holding its breath from inside. The second thing I noticed was the smell. It would seep under my door late at night. It wasn't a bad smell, not like rot or garbage. It was the scent of old books, dust, and something else. Something dry like mothballs and old leather. It was a smell that felt ancient. I started waking up at exactly 3:17 a.m. every night. Not from a nightmare, not from a noise. I just opened my eyes, and the digital clock would glow 3:17, and the apartment would be filled with that dry, dusty smell. And I'd have this overwhelming, irrational certainty that someone was standing on the other side of my door listening. I tried to rationalize it. Drafts in an old building, my imagination running wild in a new place. But then, the small things started. One morning, I found a single dead fly lying perfectly in the center of my welcome mat. Its wings were gone, just the body. I swept it away, thought nothing of it. The next day, there were 3, all placed in a neat line facing my door. No wings. I finally asked the super about Mr. Albright. The man just shrugged. Pays his rent on time, never complains, been here longer than anyone, just likes his privacy. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping. Though the old lady who lived in your place before you, she moved out pretty sudden, said she couldn't sleep, kept talking about the quiet. That night, the 3:17 wake-up call came with a new feature. A sound, or the lack of one. From the hallway, I heard my own doorknob not turning. It was the subtle metallic shift of the mechanism moving without the knob itself rotating. A faint internal click of the lock being tested from the outside. I lay frozen in bed, my blood turned to ice. I didn't breathe. After a minute, the dry, dusty smell intensified and then slowly faded away. He'd been testing the lock. He knew I was in here. I bought a doorstop, a cheap rubber wedge. It made me feel a little safer. For 2 nights, nothing happened. On the 3rd night, I woke up again, 3:17. The smell was overpowering, and I heard a new sound. A soft, dry scraping sound, like sandpaper on wood. It was coming from the other side of my front door. I crept out of bed, my heart hammering, and pressed my eye to the peephole. The hallway was dark, lit only by the dim emergency light at the far end, and he was there. Mr. Albright. He was tall and painfully thin, dressed in a dark formal suit that looked decades out of style. His back was to me, and he was slowly, methodically, running his long, pale fingers along the wall opposite my door. That was the source of the scraping sound. His fingertips were tracing the faded floral pattern of the wallpaper. He stopped. His head, which had been tilted down, slowly began to turn towards my door. I jerked back from the peephole, my hand clamped over my mouth to stop a scream. I didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, I went to leave for work. I moved the rubber doorstop and opened the door. There, centered perfectly on my welcome mat, was a small, dead sparrow. Its head was twisted at a sharp, unnatural angle, and its eyes were missing. I packed a bag that night. I wasn't staying. I called a friend and said I was coming over, that I'd explain later. As I rushed to my car in the parking lot, I looked up at the 4th floor. His window was dark as always, but mine, The light in my studio was on. I was certain I'd turned it off. I stayed away for 3 days. When I came back to grab more of my things, the super flagged me down. "Hey, you just missed him," he said. "Mr. Albright. He left you something." My blood ran cold. The super handed me a small, neatly wrapped package. Brown paper, tied with twine. It was light as a feather. Inside my apartment, with the door locked and braced, I opened it. There was no note. Inside, nestled on a bed of what looked like fine, gray dust, was a small, intricately carved bone whistle. It was cold to the touch, and I knew with a certainty that chilled my soul that it wasn't meant to be blown by human lips. It was a thing for summoning or listening. I threw it in the trash. I moved out the next week. I heard from the new tenant in 4A a month later, a guy I knew from work. He texted me, "Hey, weird question. Did you ever have issues with flies in that apartment?" I didn't answer. I just blocked the number. Some silences aren't meant to be broken, and some neighbors aren't just quiet, they are the silence itself. And they get jealous when you make a sound.